what really happened? What made you kind of UTV was then, you moved out, and Ronnie moved out and was not with you guys. And so what really made you decide on that? Because the company was doing fantastic, and you were a part of it all, and it's like you get attached to things, and I mean it was like, it's your own baby and you're giving it away. So
So in a
how?
way, I mean, I have to say that, we sold the company to we sold the company to the Walt Disney Company at that point of time,
Hmm.
and it was a really good deal for UTV because now there were the resources of this big company coming in and being able to help us do that much more. Ronnie, of course, moved on pretty early after that because I think Ronnie really is an entrepreneur, and for him to work within a larger organization sort of setup was not really his cup of tea. But I
Hmm.
think he felt it was the right way forward for the company. And then I ran the company for 3 years after that. We produced Dangal, we did Beauty and the Beast as a stage show. So there were a lot of really, really good memories there, and we did some good work.
Hmm.
But I think what I realized at the end of that process was it was time for me to move on and do my own thing,
Hmm.
because that was an ambition that I had sort of early on, but I wanted to have, enough, like sort of enough experience under my belt to take that leap and to
Hmm.
do things on my own. And I think that came at just the right time. We had just produced Dangal and it had done what it did, and it was the right time to move on. And so no regrets there. I think every
Hmm.
sort of every experience has its place, has a particular journey. That journey ends and you have to move on to the next one.
Okay, tell me, you did more than 40 plus films. So, which was the most challenging project out of all these?
I'd say probably Barfi was one of those projects that was really quite challenging because it was sort of breaking quite a few norms. You had Ranbir Kapoor at that time, who was a romantic young romantic superstar, and
Hmm.
we had him be like sort of deaf mute in the film, and then you had Priyanka Chopra, who was playing someone mildly autistic. So two fabulous actor stars at their in their prime, who we
Hmm.
were taking and putting in really really different roles in that sense.
Yeah.
And the budget was one that was of a regular, it wasn't a big budget, but it wasn't a small budget either.
Hmm.
But I think, the narration that Anurag Basu gave us was so compelling and so beautiful. It was something that he wasn't able to put down on paper, though you can imagine how hard we must have tried to
Yeah.
get it down on paper.
Yeah.
But the narration he gave us was so wonderful that we decided to just take that leap of faith and do it. So actually, Burfi was one of those experiences that's very special because I think we took a story that was all about feeling and emotion rather than plot, and we were able to make that a success.
Okay. We can go back a little to your personal life. So, you're married to this one awesome, beautiful, fantastic, talented actress, Vidya Balan. How
Thank
did
you.
that come about?
Well, we actually, the first film that we distributed at UTV was Vidya's very first film, Parinita. And so I mean, the first film that I had the chance to be associated with when I joined UTV. So it's quite ironic.
Hmm.
So we obviously met at that point of time, but not really stayed in touch.
Hmm.
And then we made a film called No One Killed Jessica, and in the course of that, we started, like sort of getting in touch much more. And one thing led to another. There was a meeting of minds. We realized that we're very similar in many ways. We enjoyed the same things. We both loved the movies, and it was just like sort of one thing led to another from there. So that's really the course of the shoot of No One Killed Jessica was really the time that it all happened.
Okay. Um, the sky is pink, right? Tell me something about that, because that film was really appreciated and won many awards. So give us a little rundown on that, and what was it about the film that made you want to make it? I mean, there's always, sometimes it's the story that attracts you, sometimes it could be the casting, which of course usually comes later, but sometimes it could be the director who's making it and you have faith in him. So in this project, what was the strong point and what made you go ahead with it?
I react to material that moves me personally, and that I feel like this is a story that has to be told. And I saw Shonali Bose's film that she made just before The Sky is Pink, and
Hmm.
it was a wonderful, wonderful film. This film called Margarita with a Straw. And
Hmm.
I remember leaving the theater completely like shell shocked and heartbroken and in shambles, pretty much. I was barely able to mouth my words of appreciation to her because the film had moved me so much. And I got in touch with her and said, listen, we have to do something together. She said, oh, I have a script. I'd love you to read it. And she
Uh,
gave me the script for The Sky is Pink. And I remember reading it, and at the end of reading it, I just sort of picked up the phone on her and said that we'd love to do this movie. I mean, I'd love to be the producer of this film, because it was such a painful story, but
mm,
she told it with so much humor because she used the voiceover of the young girl who had died, and the typical 18-year-old irreverent, naughty, childish, but also bordering on being a woman sort of attitude that voiceover had. And she was narrating the love story of her parents and how
mm,
her parents had gone through the process of actually investing their entire lives in bringing her up, sort of despite the fact that she had this disease that was life threatening, and that her life was not supposed to last beyond 1 or 2 years, but it lasted till she was 18. And it kept going back and forth in time, but it was really the love story of the parents. And when I realized that this was a true story, then when I met the actual couple, Nilin and Aditi Chaudhary, who are wonderful, wonderful people,
uh,
I just realized this was a story that I had to tell.
okay, so it did get awards, and now tell me about Netflix. Now you've done something with Netflix, which is also being appreciated a lot. So tell us a little about that, because now that's moving into today's time. That's a web series, and
That's right.
you've always, like, even with Ronnie and all through your career, you've kind of taken the next step and the next step and the next step, and this is the step to take today. So tell me a little about this.
So this is again a true story of these two young boys from the slums of Bombay who were typical hip hop dancers in their respective communities, etc. But juvenile delinquents, virtually, bordering on going into the bad side, who went to a dance school because they, were both sent, like, sort of in different ways. They landed up there. And
Mm,
an Israeli American ballet instructor happened to be there for a few months holding ballet classes, and he saw them and he realized that they have the potential to be world class ballet dancers, and started training them.
mm,
And today they're both doing exceptionally well and both have global ballet careers.
mm,
And again, it was one of those stories that I read about in the Sunday Midday, I think. Then I realized that Sunit Araporwala, who I'd worked with on The Namesake, and she had written The Namesake,
mm,
had already made a short film on them, like it was a documentary film, but like a 12-minute short. So
mm,
we got in touch because we'd been discussing working together also. And I asked her whether she'd like to make it as a film, and she said absolutely. And so
mm,
she wrote a great script. We went to Netflix and we made a film called Ye Ballet,
mm,
and it's on Netflix now. And
mm,
it's been garnering a lot of love and a lot of appreciation.
mm, mhm. Okay. I have to share something with you, Sid. Many, many years ago, my first talk show that I did, that was for Star Plus. You also worked with Star Plus, and it was called The Kiran Juneja Show. And I had called your mom on the show. I had Saloni.
Really,
Yes, I
I
did.
had no idea.
And yeah, that's why I wanted to tell you. And today, here you are talking to me again. So I think you guys seem to be lucky for me, uh, having shared that. So let's get back to today, what the situation, how tough times are right now and what all we are going through. And so is the film industry. And we have immense number of workers who are daily wagers. Our film industry, I think 80% runs, maybe 90% runs on daily wagers. And today they are the ones who've been affected the most. So first, just tell me, what do you think about it? And, what is it going to be like the next, say, 1 year for us as the film industry people?
Well, as you said, I think it's going to be a tough year. There's no doubt about the fact that we should be prepared for the coming months to be tough, and for there to be no certainties. I mean, I want to be humble enough to say that I really can't predict the future. I can't tell what will happen, but from what one is gauging of the way that things are going around the world in terms of the resumption of production, the pace at which it's restarting, etc., it is not going to be easy because there are safety protocols to be put in place. There are different things that have to be taken into account when we resume. So it'll really be a learning process for us. What I think is important though is that as soon as the lockdown ends and things start getting into a more normal rhythm, we take the first baby steps and we really start figuring out how to get back to the new normal. Because if things continue in this way for too much longer, not just the film industry, but I think most industries around us will reach a situation where it'll be tough to even get back to restarting. because there'll be so many workers who are working on the fringes whose lives and livelihoods are so badly affected that either they go back to, the rural areas that they came from, or the tier 2, tier 3 cities that they came from, and you won't have that labor anymore to actually do all the work that you need to keep the wheels of our industry, churning.
Oh,
So I think it's really important that we figure out ways and means to, while being safe, resume work and resume activity.
So right now, you know that there was a 12-member committee that went and met the CM a couple of days ago, few days ago.
Yes.
And, of course, the CM has been very, very supportive and said that you can, we can resume shootings, that we have to find remote studios. So some of our studios are remote, and Film City, which is not so far, but is remote also. So some of the work can be done. We can shoot, but they also want the post-production to have spacious studios. Now with Bombay, being what Bombay is, everybody is right now working in studios that are like 10 by 10, literally. We luckily have maybe 1 or 2, 3 old studios that people have converted into dubbing, etc., etc. And so those are the studios which are still huge, and distancing can be maintained there. But most of the studios will not be able to function because they're really very, very tiny. Small rooms. So how are we going to meet these challenges? And also, what I would like to know is, we were not going to have. You said they've all gone back to their villages, so we are not going to have enough people to support a shooting per se. We have teams of 100 people for a shoot, 200 people, 80 people for a shoot. And now I think we'll really have to cut down on the number of people that we work with because of social distancing and also because of non-availability. I think time is coming when multitasking is going to be there. And I think everyone will be donning more than one hat. So basically, you'll be doing more than what you were expected to do in the past. You think that is possible, feasible, and will it change? Will it change the film industry norms and way of working and the number of people that we employ forever?
Well, that's a really big question, and I'm not sure I have all the answers right now, but I think it's fair to say that necessity is a mother of invention. So if we are told that this is the way that you can work going forward, and this is the only way that it will be viable to work in the future, then I do think that we'll figure out ways and means to be able to work around that. It might not be the worst thing in the world for us to be mandated that you have only X number of people on set at any point of time. In any case, we were maybe being too excessive about the numbers of people on units. It'll give us an opportunity to be more efficient, also. But like you said, below a certain bare minimum, we won't be able to function. So maybe smaller TV shoots could restart first, then maybe slightly larger shoots. Those large, big movie shoots that we're used to having, hundreds of people on set, that might be a thing of the past. I don't know when that's going to be coming back. Also, I think, what the CM so far has indicated is that the orange zones and the green zones are fine to shoot in. If you're in a red zone, like we are clearly in Mumbai, it's going to take a little bit longer. He's put someone to interface with the industry from his side, who's going to be working with us through the process. And I'm hopeful that, as I said, we'll take baby steps. We'll start with smaller shoots, experiment, see how it's going, put the safety measures into place, and then keep building from there as we go.
If you have liked our video, kindly subscribe. Press the bell icon so that you can get notifications about our latest videos. Like and share our video.